There will be a moment, sometimes months into holding your ground, sometimes years, when you realize something that feels almost counterintuitive at first, that surviving a relationship with a narcissist, whether that's a partner, a parent, a coworker, or someone you're not yet able to fully remove from your life, sometimes requires you to say things that aren't entirely true. Not because you're weak, not because you're being manipulative yourself, but because there's a very specific difference between honesty as a moral virtue offered to someone who's earned it, and honesty as a vulnerability handed to someone who's proven repeatedly that they'll use it against you. Today we're talking about 5 specific things you may need to say to a narcissist that aren't strictly true, and why, in the very particular context of protecting your own peace, doing so isn't dishonesty at all. It's survival. Here's what needs to be said clearly before we go any further, because the framing here really matters. This isn't a lesson in becoming manipulative, in learning to lie your way through life, in adopting the same dishonest tactics that have likely caused you so much pain. What we're actually talking about today is something much more specific, strategic, non-disclosure, and calculated deflection used exclusively as a shield, not a weapon, deployed specifically with someone who has already demonstrated, beyond any reasonable doubt, that your full, unguarded truth gets weaponized against you the moment you offer it. There's an enormous difference between lying to manipulate someone and withholding accurate information from someone who has proven they cannot be trusted with it. Today, we're focused entirely on the second category. So let's walk through these 5 things, because each one addresses a very specific vulnerability that narcissists are especially skilled at exploiting, and understanding exactly why each one works is just as important as knowing what to say. The first thing you may need to say, even when it isn't fully true, is, "I don't feel strongly about that either way." This is one of the most protective phrases available when a narcissist is fishing for information about what genuinely matters to you, what you're excited about, what you're hoping for. Because remember, anything you reveal as important to you becomes, in their hands, a potential lever, something to threaten, withhold, or use as leverage the next time they want to regain control. This doesn't mean suppressing your actual passions and preferences from your own life. It means declining to hand over an accurate map of exactly what you care about most to someone who has demonstrated they'll use that map against you. Your genuine excitement, your genuine hopes, your genuine priorities can still exist fully, just not necessarily on display for someone who's proven untrustworthy with that information. The second thing you may need to say is, "You're right, I hadn't thought about it that way." Even when you have thought about it that way, extensively, and disagree completely. This phrase isn't capitulation. It's strategic de-escalation, deployed specifically in moments where genuine debate isn't actually possible, where the goal was never mutual understanding but simply winning, and where continuing to argue your accurate position only extends an interaction that has no realistic chance of reaching genuine resolution. Saving your actual opinions for people capable of genuinely hearing them, while offering strategic agreement to someone who's only interested in being right, protects your energy for battles that are actually winnable, with people actually capable of real dialogue. The third thing you may need to say is, "I'm doing fine, work has just been busy," when the truth is you're doing everything you can to create emotional distance from them specifically. This is one of the most important protective statements available, because your genuine emotional state, your growing clarity, your increasing distance, all of this information, if handed over honestly, gives a narcissist exactly what they need to escalate whatever tactic might pull you back into closer range. Attributing your distance to something external and mundane, rather than to the accurate internal shift actually happening, protects the real work of separation you're doing without inviting direct confrontation over it before you're ready or safe enough to have that confrontation on your own terms. The fourth thing you may need to say is, "I don't really remember the details of that conversation. even when you remember every single word with painful clarity, specifically in situations where relitigating a past conversation serves no purpose except giving them another opportunity to rewrite what actually happened. This isn't about abandoning your own memory or doubting your own perception, the way gaslighting tries to convince you to do. It's about strategically declining to engage in a conversation you already know isn't being offered in good faith, protecting your accurate memory privately while refusing to hand it over as ammunition for another round of narrative distortion. The fifth thing you may need to say is, "That sounds like a great opportunity for you," in response to something that genuinely, honestly, makes you uncomfortable, threatened, or concerned, specifically in situations where an authentic reaction would only be used to generate exactly the kind of anxious, competitive, off-balance response the narcissist is fishing for. This one requires the most nuance because it's not about pretending enthusiasm you don't feel in every context. It's specifically protective in situations like triangulation attempts where your genuine discomfort is the entire point of what's being shared with you in the first place, and offering calm, disinterested neutrality removes the payoff they're specifically hoping to extract. And underneath all five of these protective phrases, there's something deeper worth understanding, something that explains exactly why strategic non-disclosure like this isn't actually dishonest in any meaningful moral sense, even though it involves saying things that aren't literally, technically true. And understanding the deeper principle is exactly where we need to go next. That's exactly where we're going next. That deeper principle, the one that explains why strategic non-disclosure like this isn't actually dishonest in any meaningful moral sense, comes down to something worth naming directly. Honesty, as a genuine virtue, was never meant to function as an unconditional obligation owed equally to every person, regardless of how they've behaved. It's a relational agreement built on trust, reciprocity, and safety, where two people offer each other accurate information because doing so strengthens the connection between them. When one person consistently uses that information as a weapon, distorts it, weaponizes it, punishes vulnerability instead of honoring it, the foundation that honesty is supposed to rest on has already been broken, and not by you. This is the crucial distinction that makes everything we've walked through today ethically sound rather than manipulative. Lying to deceive someone for your own gain, to control them, to extract something from them they wouldn't willingly give you if they knew the truth, that's manipulation, and it causes real harm. What we've covered today is fundamentally different. It's protective withholding, aimed at someone who has already demonstrated they cannot be trusted with accurate information, deployed specifically to prevent harm rather than cause it. You're not taking anything from them. You're simply declining to keep handing them a weapon they've already shown you they'll use. I want to address something important here because I know this entire framework can feel uncomfortable at first, especially for people with a strong, genuine commitment to honesty as a core value. If you're someone who prides yourself on transparency, on saying what you mean, on believing that healthy relationships require full truth-telling, the idea of strategically managing what you share with someone can feel like a betrayal of your own integrity. I want to gently push back on that feeling because it's built on an assumption that doesn't actually hold up once you examine it closely. Full transparency is a gift you offer to relationships capable of holding it safely. It was never meant to be a blanket policy applied indiscriminately to every single person you encounter, regardless of whether they've earned that level of access to your inner world. Discernment about who gets your full truth isn't dishonesty. It's wisdom, and it's one of the most important skills anyone recovering from a relationship with a narcissist eventually has to learn. I also want to be honest about the discomfort this can create, because pretending it feels natural or easy from the start wouldn't be truthful either. For a lot of people, especially those with deep empathy, saying something that isn't fully true, even strategically, even for good reason, can trigger real guilt. a nagging sense that you're becoming someone you don't want to be. I want you to hold two things simultaneously here. First, that discomfort is a sign of your own genuine integrity, not evidence that you're doing something wrong. People who don't care about honesty at all don't feel guilty when they bend the truth. The fact that this feels uncomfortable for you is proof of exactly the character that made you vulnerable to this relationship in the first place, and that same character remains fully intact even as you learn this specific situational skill. Second, that discomfort tends to fade with practice, not because your integrity erodes, but because you gradually internalize the distinction between protective withholding and genuine dishonesty. Clearly enough that the guilt stops attaching itself automatically to every instance of strategic non-disclosure. Now, I want to address something practically important because there's a real risk of misapplying this framework if it isn't held carefully. These 5 protective phrases are tools specifically calibrated for interactions with someone who has demonstrated a consistent pattern of using honesty against you. They are not a template for how to operate in your healthy relationships, your genuine friendships, your relationships with people who have earned and continue to earn your trust. Applying this kind of strategic guardedness broadly to people who haven't demonstrated the same pattern of exploitation risks isolating you from the very connections capable of helping you heal, and risks reinforcing a broader habit of emotional guardedness that serves you poorly outside the very specific context we've been discussing today. The skill here isn't becoming someone who withholds truth generally. It's becoming someone precise enough to know exactly who has earned your full honesty and who hasn't, and calibrating accordingly. I want to leave you with something today that I think matters more than almost anything else we've covered, because it reframes this entire conversation in a way that I hope feels genuinely empowering rather than uncomfortable. Learning to strategically withhold accurate information from someone who has proven untrustworthy with it isn't a compromise of your character, it's an evolution of it. The version of you that used to hand over your full truth to anyone, regardless of how they treated it, wasn't more honest than the version of you learning these 5 phrases today. That earlier version was simply undiscerning, offering something precious to people who hadn't earned the right to receive it safely. The version of you learning to protect your inner world with precision and intention isn't less authentic. It's simply, finally, treating your own truth as something valuable enough to require some measure of protection, extended fully and generously to the people who deserve it, and offered more carefully to those who've shown you unmistakably that they don't. If this gave you permission to protect your peace in a way that finally makes sense, know that you're far from the only one learning to navigate this exact balance, and there's a lot more we can work through together as we go. Make sure you're subscribed because we go deeper into this every single week.